Well, hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira, and today, of course, is the day when the budget was presented by the Union Finance Minister, and it was an important budget considering how we are in the midst of the pandemic, and all eyes were on the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to get an eye or to get a glimpse of what she has in store for us for the next 1 year and how the government is going to try and address several of those challenges. To talk about the key takeaways and the highlights of Budget 2022, I have with me a stellar panel, and I'd like to welcome them all on board. Dr. Ajay Dua, former Commerce and Industry Secretary and Senior Economist, is joining us today. Also with us, Jayant Das Gupta, former Secretary, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India and former Ambassador of India at the WTO. And we also have Mr. R. Gopalan, former Financial Services Secretary for the Finance Ministry, Government of India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of
Frank can't hear.
No, I'm not able to hear, Frank.
How are you, Mr. Gopalan?
How are you, Mr. Dua?
How are you? Good evening.
Good.
Are you in Chennai, Mr. Gopalan?
Currently, yes.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Jan.
I saw you in shirt sleeves, so I realized.
Yeah, that's why even I asked that question. That's how I guessed about Chennai. You are the only odd man out, Jan. We are in
Yes, sir.
we are in temperate climate.
Sorry about that. I had a bit of an internet connection issue. This is something that we always have, and some issues that we can't, that are out of our purview. But Ms. Dua, let me start with you first. Let's analyze some of the key takeaways, highlights, and the big, big highlights for you from today's budget speech of the Finance Minister.
Right. I would confine myself to 5 of them and state these very quickly without elucidating these at this point of time. One, I think it's a budget in which the finance minister has tried hard to balance the expenditure with the revenue. That's why not many tax reliefs have been given, and though they're on that account, there might be disappointment particularly in the middle class who are the salaried class. That's number one. Number two, the fiscal deficit has been sought to be kept a little lower than what it was last year's. She anticipates 6.8 will become 6.9, but for the current year, she has put it at 6.4. Let's see how long the pandemic lasts, because a lot of government expenditure is going to be linked with that and the government support for healthcare. So that's a positive. First one, I would call it also a positive that she hasn't. All right, borrowings are going to be higher, but as long as the borrowed money is spent well, I'm not overly concerned about it. That's number two. Number three is that the emphasis in the budget is certainly on how to be preparing yourself for the future. She's talked of the Amrit Kal, that means next 25 years. And so the provisions, etc., which have been made are somewhat forward-looking, I would say, and I'm qualifying the word, particularly with respect to digital, all the support for moving the country into a digital economy that is futuristic. It is also futuristic because there is sufficient indication to say that the Prime Minister's commitment at COP26 in Glasgow is going to be followed up. So there is sufficient in the budget. By provisions probably may not match, but the direction, clean fuel, emphasis on hydrogen, emphasis on ethanol, petrol blending, on EVs, all that is there. So that is also, I would say, forward-looking. Where perhaps now the other two things, where perhaps enough probably has not been done, is one with respect to addressing inflation, which seems pretty high. It might be, as the finance minister might say, it is within the plus minus 2% or 4% that or 4, that because it is below 5.6, so at 5.8 CPI, she said it's all right. And second is that perhaps much more could have been done on immediately addressing the issue of job losses which has taken place and the high unemployment level. Let me stop at these.
Absolutely. I'll come back to this very important point on job creation and what possibly could have been done and what you would have liked to see in the next round maybe. But let me bring in the other panelists as well. Mr. Dasgupta, let me come to you now. We're looking at an expected growth rate of about 9.27% in the coming year. Do you see that being achieved, with, especially with the global headwinds and how the entire Asian economy is being impacted by it?
I may be mistaken, but I thought that the economic survey projected the growth at between 8 and 8.5% against the
Absolutely.
IMF's projection of above 9. So we have, I think, tempered our growth expectations. That is one. The headwinds are quite strong because there is overall very high inflation. Inflation is also catching up in the Western world, which will call for policy rate hikes by the US Fed, for instance. There are expectations that they will raise the rates at least 5 times during this year. That will immediately lead to some flight of capital from the emerging markets, from India as well. The third is about the oil prices. Brent crude is selling for about $90 per barrel. And many of the assumptions made in our budget has been made on the basis of $70 to $75 per barrel. So if the prices were to continue to remain above 80, around 90 or so, there would be great pressure on our fisc. So that is another problem. The last point is about waning consumer demand, which has not really picked up, despite industry doing well, the large industry. So that has led to the shrinkage of the MSME sector and joblessness and, of course, unemployment in the rural areas as well. So this is all told, this will perhaps not augur well if it continues for a substantial period of time to enhance our growth prospects that we will hit 8.5 or so. The last point I wanted to make in this context is that there are certain assumptions which have been made that the capex, for instance, will be about 7.5 lakh crores against 5.5 lakh crores last year. And that is premised on sufficient fiscal space being available to the government. Of course, the government has projected the borrowing to be about 14.5 lakh crores for its expenditure against about approximately 13 lakh crores last year. So there would be a pressure on liquidity as well, because the government may mop up the money which is available in the market, which can lead to certain problems in growth. So sustaining growth, I think, has been the main theme of this budget at the cost of, let's say, welfare schemes. For instance, Narega, the budget provision last year was 73,000 crores. The actual expenditure was much more than that, about 98,000 crores, if I'm not wrong. This year, again, the budget estimate has been at 73,000 crores, which is about 25% less than the actual expenditure or revised estimate. So how do we increase the consumer demand will remain a major problem, apart from, of course, the issue of unemployment and joblessness. While we are on it, there was an expectation that there would be something similar to Narega on for the urban poor. So there are complications of building, for instance, durable community assets in the urban areas. And if jobs are that much more easily available in the urban areas, whether there would be a migration from the rural areas to the urban areas, leading to other problems of housing, sanitation, water, and pressure on the resources. So, but that we have not gone down that road yet about having an employment guarantee program for the unemployed in the urban areas.
Absolutely. Mr. Gopalan, let me come to you now. You know, a lot of emphasis has been laid on this PM Gati Shakti master plan, and the budget speech, kept speaking about the master plan as well. How do you see that progressing? Do you think that many of the answers can be, many of the tough questions can be answered through the Gati Shakti master plan?
Let me give my piece on the budget, the economy, the growth, what has been given there, so that I place all these things in a proper perspective. Okay. Now, if you look at the growth assumptions in the 22-23, it's about 8 to 8.5, and with a 3% on the GDP deflator, taking it about 11.1% as a nominal growth rate for the economy. And this year it's about 19.5 is the nominal growth rate projected as a result of the nominal GDP calculations. Now, which means that next year growth projections are slightly less, 9.2 this year and 8 to 8.5 next year. That's the kind of growth rate which has been presumed. Now, if you look at that, two things strike out. One is about the growth itself. Are we going to get this kind of a growth? My problem there is that the growth is dependent on both the union budget as well as state government budgets. State government budgets, as we look into, are stressed very badly because much of the expenditure which was diverted for capital, expenses. Now, mind you, the states spend more on capital expenditure as compared to the center. Now, there is a diversion which is taking place for COVID-related expenses, which, along with the reduced inflow of their own state-owned tax resources, it's going to cause them a bit of a problem. And the growth, if you calculate on models, the growth is also dependent on the budgets of the combined budget of center and the state together. Now, if you project them, you will find that the number of growth at about nominal growth rate of nominal GDP of 258 lakh crores may be a little difficult to achieve. Maybe it will be a little less than that. That is my present feeling, unless I get into the state government budgets, which are 2 months down the road. So once we look at those numbers, we will be in a position to understand what they are looking like. But I also have to look at what the interest rates are likely to be. Now, there was a mention about the borrowings, the net borrowings. The gross borrowings are going to be about 14.95 crores and about against 11.86 crores of last year. Net coming to about 11.86 against 7.75 of last year. Gross 14.95 against 10.46 of the last year, which is last year I am meaning 21-22. So now if you look at it, then where are the GSEC rates which are now at this point in time? They are in the upward region of about 6.8, 6.9. Now, if that is the case, then the interest rates in the economy itself will go up, which will prevent corporates getting into corporate bond markets for the capital investment programs. That cost is going to go up. Already the capacity utilization in the economy is about 70%, and people are not interested in bringing in, investing more into the economy, creating capital assets at this point in time. Now, with all this, where is going to the investment is going to come in? Now, if investment is not going to come in, how is the growth going to be durable and sustainable? So this is the second question I'm placing before all of you for consideration. Third one is inflation. Now, inflation, Giant and everybody has talked about importing inflation into the country, which is necessary, which will happen, and we need to cyclically adjust our tax rates so that the inflation, in some sense, is not allowed to overtake the whole economy. Otherwise, we will suffer budgetary deficits, which will then create another problem of its own. So, as far as I'm concerned, inflation at this point in time, with prices, international prices of commodities being high, and possibility of depreciation of a currency thanks to outflow of dollars going out as a result of interest rates going up in other countries, making it unattractive to have bond investments in this country. These are the kind of effects that will work on and ensure that inflation stays high. Now, how are we going to handle that inflation is a most important issue. And the last one is on the joblessness or unemployment, which both Mr. Dua and Mr. Dasgupta have explained in detail. So these four are my major problems as I see in the budget.
Absolutely. Let me take that particular aspect forward with you, Mr. Dua. You know, this whole aspect of at a time like this, we've seen government spending go up. And even in this particular budget, and in the economic survey points out how the government spending needs to go up and has to go up and will go up in the next 1 year as well. So where is the money really going to come from, and how are we going to address this issue of inflation?
Frank, it's going to come, as the government has itself indicated, and Mr. Gopalan elaborated it very well. It is going to be largely through borrowings. The borrowings might crowd out private investment in India. The fear which Mr. Dasgupta has, it could happen, but also there is a likelihood that if we are able to join, and there's a great effort, a concerted effort on part of the government agencies to make sure that we are able to join the global bond index. If that happens, it will make it easier for us, our corporates, our country as a whole, to be able to raise money, cheaper money, and overseas. And that could be substantial. Initially, it may not be so much, but the expectation is that towards the end of the year, the pace might be at the rate of 5 trillion rupees per year could be coming from there shortly. That's number one. Having said that, I am fearful that as we have to be about higher borrowings, it also depends upon whether the money is going to be well spent or is it going to be frittered away. I think in the present context, let's not bother too much about the rating agencies or who look at the fiscal deficit much more than the actual utilization. But that, I think they are also moving away from it. If we are spending on creating jobs and on healthcare, that will be seen as a positive thing rather than a negative, that you are preparing for the future. If the health of the people is looked after, if they are kept healthy, malnutrition, all those kinds of issues are getting addressed. So we may not see the kind of the fear which we have, and it will be money spent usefully. However, if you spend it all on infrastructure and long-term results, no immediate creation of jobs, no immediate creation of the assets, it could become inflationary because it is promising growth much later once the infrastructure is completed, not right now. So as of now, I think the infrastructure increase, including last year started and this year augmented, 1 lakh crore, a trillion rupees also to be given to the states for their capex. Capex, as long as it forms a part of a larger master plan being called PM Gati Shakti, those kind of programs, the states will also get enabled. So there, couple of things have been spelled out. The highway expenditure, highway building will be stepped up to 35,000 kilometers this year, which is labor intensive and I think is useful. It is not going to be postponing seeing the results. Second, all the railways probably takes a little longer, and the emphasis has to be on the labor intensive infrastructure to be created right now. And I am happy that under the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, the provision is 48,000 crores, and as many as 80 lakh houses are proposed to be completed. Again, housing, both in the rural as well as urban area, Prime Minister Awas Yojana has two components. That is a labor-intensive activity. Some more could have been done for the housing sector to get private sector also into it. And second, Manrega, about which Jen talked about, yes, but I don't get overly worried about Manrega because the government has to jolly well fund it. It can delay it. It's a legal requirement. They look at balancing the budget in the beginning or keeping the fiscal deficit down. But at the end of the year, if jobs have been created, state governments actually try and stop it because they don't have the liquidity. So they only create that many jobs as the center money. But the lower wages remain lower than even the minimum wages. Improvement certainly required, but that is something which must continue and has to be adequately provided for. Having said that, I would have liked to see in the services sector, particularly hospitality and transportation, which are labor-intensive jobs in India, particularly hospitality, that also being provided for, provided the staff is not retrenched. If the staff is retrenched, there is no need for the government then to support the capital which has been created, or that's only going to help the promoters and the owners. But if they are retaining the staff, the deferment of the income tax, or actually by deferment, if there are no profits, there's no income tax payable by them. Absolutely. The credit institutions would have probably looked at a little more benignly in terms of servicing, etc. But the state governments also would have had a major role to play in deferring the utility bills, be it water, electricity, property taxes, or the so-called luxury tax, because that's become a major source of income for states as well as municipal bodies. Some cities also have started levying luxury tax on the hotels. So those kind of things needed to be removed. I would have said finally in this subject that inflation, about which my fellow panelists have talked, and incidentally all three of us are working together in the ministry at the same point of time. So we've seen that inflation could have been reined in if the government has used the budget to announce that it will push the GST Council of including, the GST Council has to first include petroleum products and electricity under the GST 4. Had that happened, government would have to reflect the reduced budget revenue in the budget itself. So that's why this was a place, because the revenue would have fallen to that extent. Even if the GST Council retains it at 28%, the highest slab, these activities, yet it would have been lower than 46%, which is the current center state average rate of GST on petroleum products. That would have been, petroleum is consumed across, or it has effect on fuel, has effect across the price range of most products, be it consumer goods or wholesale index. And wholesale index for the first time, as you know, is 13 to 14%. Consumer might be lower, which the finance minister has very proudly said that is within the permissible band of 2% plus minus 4.
Right.
That's the MPC guideline. So plus GST is keeping GST high is a very regressive taxation. It affects the poor and the rich alike. Income tax, on the other hand, is far more progressive. So keeping the GST at such a high level, we were hitting the common man.
Absolutely. Let me take both those aspects forward with you, Mr. Dasgupta. One on taxation, the government has ensured that there are no cuts as far as tax slabs are concerned. And with regards to the GST, even the finance minister made the announcement about how January saw the highest ever collection under the GST regime. So how would you look at both these aspects?
I think there was no space to cut taxes by way of income tax or customs revenues. The problem is that we have been raising customs tariffs over a range of products, a very large number of products really, over the past 5 years. And many of these products are going as inputs into manufacturing industries. And they are actually raising the cost of the finished product. So we have to really study the impact of raising import tariffs on the final output and how are we faring. Because the effective rate of protection, we may raise the import tariff on an intermediate product to 10%, 15%, or whatever, 20%. But the effective rate of protection actually is not that high. It acts in a counterproductive way. So that is something which I think the government needs to seriously look at. So the short point is that in terms of customs revenues and income tax, there's very little scope for the government to do anything. GST is the one where I think, since we are a service-oriented economy with more than 55% coming from the services sector, and the large MSME sector, small industries, micro, medium, many of them are service-oriented. There are 7 crore small industries and micro industries. Now, if the GST rate is high, of course, the compliance burden is altogether another issue, which I'm not getting into. There is an inhibiting impact on the growth prospects of this sector, which is actually also hurting. So this rationalization and lowering of the GST, because the GST is kind of a regressive tax, because it hits everybody, whether his income is 500 rupees per day or 5,000 rupees per day. That is what needs to be, I think, something which the government, along with the GST Council, needs to look at. But there is a downside to that. The states are very heavily dependent on the pass-through of the GST share to them, because their revenue streams are drying up. They have, of course, the liquor tax, excise. They have transportation, which has been rationalized now. So that is there. And registration of properties. So these are the 3-4 main sources of income for them. And of course, wherever there are mines, etc., some minerals, they get the cess and royalty payment. So these are the main sources of income. And by far, before the GST came into being, the state VAT or the state sales tax was the largest component of the state's revenue. So the states would be very reluctant to really look at lowering of the rates and further erosion of their share in the central pool. So this is a problem which I think calls for diplomacy, calls for understanding, and overall the economy will not be able to progress with such high rates of GST at 28% and 18%. So this is the one thing which needs to be looked at more carefully.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. Mr. Gopalan, let me go back to a point that Mr. Dua was making about missed opportunities. Were there missed opportunities? What more would you have liked to have seen in the budget itself? What else could have been addressed from an economic point of view?
Well, see, you have to keep the macroeconomic picture in mind. Should look at the financial stability picture in mind. If you look at that, without that, nothing works. There are always problems in taxation, because our concept of taxation is, as both my co-panelists are saying, is to look at more on the direct taxes and reduce the indirect taxes, so that which is in some sense is a regressive taxation as far as the indirect taxes are concerned. Now, structurally they are pretty poles apart. You look at some of the items on which the states agreed to surrender sovereignty when the GST was introduced. Now, they were not sure whether the revenues which they were getting, despite the promise of 14% growth compensation to be paid by the center to the states, despite that, the states were very wary of how the situation would pan out to be. So what they did, we'll keep out petroleum taxation, we'll keep with us, we'll keep other things, the registration we'll keep with us, excise we'll keep with us, so that we are not going to share our sovereignty on those taxes at this point in time. And lo and behold, what had happened, because of very unfortunate circumstances of COVID having hit us, states' revenues have not increased to the extent that they thought it will increase. Now they are asking for compensation to be extended by another 2 more years. So the structure of this taxation itself, it will take some time to really settle. Now, obviously, the petroleum products have to come into it at some point in time or not. Even excise, electricity and excise also have to come in at some point in time or not. So let us await that to happen in some good times as we go along, not at the stressed time today when everybody is facing problems on the revenue side. But one thing I would say, something which is missed opportunity, is the unorganized sector and the MSMEs. Like my co-panelists have mentioned, and the hospitality and the contact services, sector, where you have to maintain certain set of staff despite the fact it is closed down. Otherwise, you will not be able to get them when the opening happens. You will not be able to get those people. And therefore, it is in your interest to keep them with you. For that, certain amount of expenses which are fixed in nature, like salary, like electricity, connection to the duty payments, those kind of things should have been subsidized by the government with those people. Having not done this, they are in a terrible jam, in the sense when they open up, they are not sure whether they are going to get the right kind of employees they are going to have. And so much of capital has been destroyed in the process as far as the savings is concerned. Now, if additional capital is required for them to run the industry, run their offices, run their setups, and also grow, now they are going to get into high loan scenario. Now, for a high loan scenario to work out, you must have a good demand and revenue to come in. So, the whole point of revving up the demand, in some sense, in my view, would have been attempted in this budget, but there are solid reasons as to why they have not done it. And I would still prefer that if something is attended to, even in the interim budget, revenues are going to grow. In my view, the revenues have been under-projected. They are going to get good amount of increased revenue. If they are going to use this for the purpose of this kind of activities which I just mentioned, it will make a good, wholesome economy, and I'm sure we will make baby steps to see that inequality gets reduced as we go along.
Absolutely. All right, it's time to get closing comments now from all my panelists. I'll start with you, Mr. Dua.
A good budget could have been better. As it's always said, the finance minister had her limitations. She's tried to do whatever she could do. It's not a populist budget, which people expected, because with elections, first round of state assembly elections in the next week or two, And second round, there are some more states, Frank, this year, 3 more which are due for elections in the second half. So the temptation must have been there. But having said that, a few issues she needed to address, but I guess the intention was there. And she's been able to flag those, and she's hoping, one, that the pandemic will subside early. Economic survey says when it talks about 8.8 to 8.5% for next year and 9.3 for this year, 9.27 it's the current year's, it also puts a whole lot of riders, one, pandemic going away, the tightening of the US Fed and liquidity tightening around the world. India is able to tide over it. So he's put it like a good economist. He's put all the riders, the new CEA, then only we will have this kind of a growth. But having said that, I would say let's give a fair trial to what has been proposed under the current circumstances, and we can always supplement the efforts. We can change the direction even going forward.
Absolutely. Mr. Dasgupta.
Very briefly, there are 2 aspects. One is that I wish there had been slightly more budget outlay for health, because it has been increased by less than 1%, around 0.5% or so. Whereas on the education side, I think there has been a substantial increase, about 16 to 18% from a comparatively small base, of course. So that is something to the good. I wish something more could have been done for the MSME sector to address the problems that this sector is facing, and which could have also led to the rise in consumer demand.
Absolutely.
And one last point I wanted to mention, India's foreign debt repayment, $256 billion worth of repayment will have to be made over the next 12 months by December 2022. So our foreign exchange reserves are likely to go down, especially if there is also a withdrawal by the foreign institutional investors from the Indian stock markets. So we have to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. Points very well taken. Do take care of yourself too, Mr. Dasgupta. It seems like you have a little bit of a throat issue, but please do take care of yourself. Mr. Gopalan, final closing comments from you.
I'm not going to make any more comments than what I had made already. I wish there are certain aspects of the economy they could have attended to, but thanks to inadequate resources, probably they thought that they should wait for better times. But they have not frittered away on useless items the expenditure. That is one thing I find is a very, very courageous step. And as both Mr. Dasgupta and Mr. Dua mentioned, when elections are around the corner, not to fritter away the resources on useless items is something which I think is politically courageous. On that sense, I think this is an interesting budget.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Much appreciate you sharing your time here on Bharata First on this very busy, big budget day. Thank you once again. All right, then with that, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of Big Picture. But before I go, of course, let me inform you that this has been a big day and many important announcements have been made as of today. And like the panelists have all said, it's a good budget. It could have been better. And there were a few missed opportunities, but also the finance minister and the government have resisted the temptation of trying to fritter away useful money as far as the political situation is concerned. Many important states going to elections just around the corner, some more important states going to polls later on during the year. So the temptation was resisted to try and make it an extremely populist budget. It is not a populist budget, but more of a bullish budget that is focusing on trying to revive an economy that is been hit by the pandemic, that is going through several global headwinds as well. But as far as opportunities are concerned, there are a few missed opportunities, and many aspects could have been addressed through this budget, is what the panelists have suggested. Let's not forget that as far as income tax is concerned, it remains unchanged. There were several people who believed and wanted a change in the tax slabs, but the government has said that it has resisted increasing the tax slabs, especially at a time when it requires funds. The borrowings are going to go up as a result of government spending, and it is going to have a direct impact on inflation. The global oil prices also could have an impact on how we grow and where we are. With that, of course, it's a wrap on this edition of a big picture. But before I go, let me ask you, have you liked the video, subscribed, and shared the content as well? If you've not done so, please do so right now. You can subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive information. This month's newsletter theme is Tribes of India, and we'll be looking at special aspects of tribes within the country and what they mean to us. So please, if any one of you wants to write for the newsletter, you may do so as well. All that information is in the description of this video. And before I go, let me also inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. And we have 26 amazing courses all put together to help you in your competitive exams journey. And not just that, to make you better Bharatiyas as well. Live classes for the second phase have already begun. We are going through sessions of personality development we've completed at least 4 or 5 modules of that. We are getting into management courses over the weekend, starting this weekend. And there are several courses that have already been completed, at least 11 of them. So in the second phase, we'll be having 14 courses. 2 of them have already begun. The others 2 will be completed over the span of the next 2.5 or 3 months. So ensure that you'll go to kc.bharatafirst.com for more details. Many candidates who have cleared UPSC CAC this year have thanked Bharata First and the Knowledge Center for playing such a big part in their success. So don't be left behind and don't regret later. Register now. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of this video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.